we get started with our next session. We have with us Mr. Sunil Kanoria, who's the Vice Chairman of SREI Infrastructure Finance and immediate past President of ASSOCHAM. So if we may please invite Mr. Sunil Kanoria on the stage with a round of applause. And let me assure you, it's after this session, we directly get to lunch. So as of now, I do believe that your thoughts might be on food, but let's get some food for thought from Mr. Kanoria. So please put your hands together, everyone, and let's welcome Mr. Kanoria.
A very good afternoon, friends. After the last few presentations which we have seen, I don't have any presentation. And I have a challenge to keeping you here in between your lunch and what I want to share. But anyway, thanks. I thank the organizers to invite me in this forum to share some of my thoughts on the subject. And I think this is an area which is very, very critical for the country. We have been talking a lot on land, challenges on land. It's become a major political issue, and the state from where I come from is Bengal. We have seen a plethora of political challenges there in the last decade or so. So with this note, I think this topic and this area, and that's what it interested me to come and share some of my thoughts when I was invited. Friends, we all know that some of the thoughts and areas which we saw today, more particularly the technologies like Hyperloop and all which is coming in, today, with the kind of leadership which India has, there is a very strong feel that we can definitely see it in our lifetime, as Mr. Gandhi also said. Because there is a visionary leadership which we have today, which wants to transform India. And the young generation, the new generation, wants to see a new India. And that gives us a lot of pride, a lot of confidence that if we work hard and if we are able to plan better, we will be able to have a much better environment and life in the near future. With these thoughts, just I wanted to share that we all know about the kind of urbanization challenges which India has. And the work which is required to be done for our population, creating housing for all. The government has initiated in the last couple of years multiple programs, whether it is the Housing for All by 2022, the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and the Urban Transformation, where schemes, programs, where a major improvement in the urban infrastructure is required to be done. The Smart City Mission, where existing infrastructure of 100 cities will get technologically revamped. These announcements have already been made. A lot of incentives have been offered, and the work has started in the last some time. However, when we look at the ground level challenges, still a lot of policy framework, a lot of changes are required to ensure that many of these thoughts, many of these programs, and the vision which we have can be effectively implemented. And one of those core areas is the topic of today is the land issue. And I have a suggestion there for this August audience and also for the policymakers that if we look at the kind of need in the urban India itself, we see is over 2 lakh hectares of land will be needed for just the urban housing need in the next few decades. If we look at just like capital and human resources, if we look at land as a critical raw material, when it comes to whether urbanization or whether development in the economy, it is a key resource. However, there is an absence of proper land records, land policies, has emerged as a major challenge in making land available, whether it is in rural India or urban India. I feel in order to capture all the information on land resources, we need to replicate the success we have achieved in mining information on India's human resources through the Aadhaar initiative. By registering more than 100 crore Indians under the Aadhaar initiative, today we have a comprehensive database of the vast majority of India's population. This data is helping immensely in shaping the development programs as per the needs of the people and is also enabling targeted delivery of subsidies by bypassing middlemen. We can see the kind of programs, everything is gradually now linking itself to the Aadhaar. And therefore, the thought which came to my mind and which I have been trying to take it up in my erstwhile position in ASSOCHAM 2 with our Prime Minister, I have been discussing at various forums, that this initiative of Aadhaar had helped us in ushering in a transparency and is plugging a lot of leakages in the way. If we now need to think of similar exercise to capture all the land-related data in India, we need to create a national data bank for all land records so that information of every inch of land can be captured. And today, with the power of technology, leveraging the GIS mapping of land and seismic technologies can be put in use in determining the nature of the land as well. This will help us collating the land records with all possible information like ownership, circle rates, nature of soil, captured quite well. We may call it an authority of land details of India. And landowners can be issued the ALDI cards. This exercise can be carried out by the center as a one-time investment, just like the Aadhaar program. But I think it can yield a very long-term benefit for the country, because the challenges today we face every time in any development, and the cost keeps escalating, is primarily because of who owns the land, can it be used, political issues and challenges which get attached to it. The center can then do a lot of R&D on the data which gets captured, just the way they are doing with Aadhaar today, and process the data, provide that information to the states, because we know that land is a state subject. The central government can only provide overarching framework and policies. And with that information, the states can frame their land use strategies and policies as per the needs of their states and the local environments. I think this is one key area as a policy, if we can make that happen through a much larger lobbying, I would say, or policy advocacy through various forums. I think that can help the country immensely, unlocking the value which land has today. For any of these programs, we will need land. The other area which I thought of sharing was, I personally feel through assessment that stamp duty, as land is one of the key resource inputs in any economic activity we do, stamp duty is a major cost component when it comes to the purchase of land. Once the GST gets implemented, which is now hopefully on the offing from July, it is also important that stamp duty gets subsumed in GST. I think it will greatly simplify the taxation implications on the sale of land, transaction of land. It will make it much more transparent, and it gets vatable on every transaction. It will, to my mind, it will add a lot to the government's revenue also, but bringing in a huge amount of systemic maintenance of land records and ease of doing activities on the land which is there. I personally feel that in the age of urbanization, rapid urbanization, the coordination between the central and the state governments is very critical. Many of the programs that the central government has come in with has to work with the state governments. A lot of the archaic rules, laws, regulations at the state and the local corporation and municipality levels have to undergo dramatic changes, whether it is relating to environment issues, whether it is zoning laws, etc. The clearances of and approvals from multiple agencies today, we see for any economic activity on a land where it is to be required, they need 30, 40, 50 approvals. Takes over 1, 2, 3 years, you never know. There's a culture of rent seeking persists in this area. How can we bring in development? How can we bring in the urbanization which we talk about if we do not bring in the ease of doing business, do not simplify those rules, etc.? A lot of work has happened at the central level, but I think it is at the every state level and the corporation level that this kind of a change and a single window clearance is required to be made in order to unleash the kind of potential which our land resources have in the country. Given these thoughts, one area which, when I was asked to share some of my thoughts today, My daughter, who's studying architecture in UC Berkeley, I talked to her to trying to get some thoughts, and she has been working a lot on urban planning in the last few years. So one of the key things which I learned, and which I think if I look back in India, which has lacked, is planning. I think the kind of long-term planning which is required for any urbanization, any development, is a very strong long-term planning of how evolution and development will happen. And if you look back and see the last 50, 60 years, the way India has developed has basically been primarily because of lack of a long-term planning, of being able to visualize where India will grow in the next 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 years. And that has been a major cause. If you see a city like Mumbai itself, it's overgrown. Every city is overgrown beyond. I don't say that other parts of the world has not happened, but I think the lack of planning in India has been phenomenal. And I think that's where a lot more focus is required before the implementation starts. What happens generally, we have governments who come in for a period of 5 years. They need to show something in short term, and therefore programs and plans happen. Governments change, plans change. How we can overcome these kind of obstacles and try and look at how we create a long-term master plan where we get the best of architects, best of urban planners all across the world to be able to guide and help see how we can solve many of our problems. As you see that what Biplav was saying on the Hyperloop side, the kind of planning which has been going for years and decades. And now today we are seeing the development, and even now a lot of work is going on. The scientists and people all across the globe are participating in trying to see that how the product and the service and the solution which comes out, it is a foolproof long-term solution. So I think that's one key area. Coming back to the thought which, the subject where I had to share my thought was on the financing side. I think if many of these policy frameworks are addressed, whether it is on the land issue, clarity of land, ease of doing business policies, I think money will come. As we have seen even in a program like Hyperloop, the world is collaborating and providing the support to make things happen. So I think money will attract and will go where it is viable, where there's a good economic balance, and multiple solutions and ways can be brought in, whether it is through a public-private partnership, whether it is the government creating, the corporations creating municipal bonds, which could be developed, whether it is through the mortgage guarantee companies which are there. Globally, in many countries, the municipalities themselves have created viable business models and have generated and raised long municipal bonds to support their development in the urban areas. However, India till now has just done, on an all-India basis, just about 1750 crores of municipal bonds. It is now that this government is working towards trying to develop the bond markets to allow the municipalities to also get the funding. There are concerns of governance, concerns of the cost of money, concerns of how the repayments would happen. Those are concerns that needs to be built in and brought in. But I think in the long term, it is through the PPP model, creating programs and models within the city, within the area, and then providing opportunities for the private sector to come in. Just the way we saw in the Indian Railways. Now they are looking at privatizing the railway stations. I'm sure a lot more opportunities will come where the mindset has now come in that India can only be developed through a multiple of government and private initiatives together, where both pool in their resources to bring in. But as I said, that the ease of doing business, clarity of policy framework is a must for attracting capital. And then I'm sure capital will come from all over the world if these areas are more addressed. Some of the basic concerns on the municipal bonds, which I'll just highlight for the audience here, is primarily how these bonds can be serviced, what kind of cash flows are there to the municipalities, how long it could be there. There are today certain ceiling rates, interest rates, ceilings are there on these bonds. I believe that should be more market driven initially to be able to attract investors. You need to develop the active secondary markets for that. Also, there's a lot of potential to build up and develop market for bid bonds and surety bonds through insurance companies, which today are primarily the domain of the banking system, and that's one of the bottlenecks for the development of many of the projects, because construction companies don't have that capacity to get those kind of guarantees from the banking system. If it was through surety bonds, it can pass on that risk to the marketplace. There are ways to create a market for securitization through the various receivables. People have done it in the past for the toll roads in the country. Multiple other annuities can be brought in for water, for property taxes which are there with the corporation's levy. That could be escrowed and funds and bonds could be raised. So there are many ways through which the financing solutions can happen. But I think the first and foremost is the right attitude, the right policy framework, and the right ease of doing business. If that area is addressed, as I said, that financing would be not a challenge. Innovation will come in financing. There are lots of instances globally where people have raised money in different environments, different markets, to different products. And I'm sure those things can get evolved. We have seen in the last 15, 20 years, being an infrastructure financing institution in the country over almost 25 years, we've seen and developed multiple programs and models. Many have worked, some have not worked, some needs revision, which is happening in the journey. But I believe that's the only way, through both combination of government expenditure and the private attractiveness in the sector, where we can bring in the urban development in the country. Friends, as I said that I will not take too long. I wanted to share some of my thoughts. I'm sure you're all waiting for lunch, but I would be happy to take any questions before we conclude. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, yes, the floor is open for questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Today at the Land Summit, one of the important questions I would like to ask, and how do we go about it, is a concept called land survey. And as per my information, it was last conducted in 1934 by the British, by the Sakli chain method. Have we done some land survey after that? For if policies have to be brought in and the usability of land have to be decided, we need to have a data to begin with. Today, everything is on presumptions and assumptions, and the political parties play one against the other. Can't we as a think tank come together to bring that first document in place and then decide how to take things further? This is my question.
I think that's exactly what I was mentioning in my entire speech. In my initial thoughts was only on land, and this is what I said, just to repeat, that land is a key resource for us. And if we can, just the way India has very successfully, it's the best model which India has done, no country has ever done of such magnitude, is our Aadhaar card, where we have been able to map 100 crore people, 1 billion people plus, through a mechanism where we have that data. The government today has that data, and therefore they are developing, providing so much of solutions and services through that program, and it is only going to increase. Similarly, what we are suggesting, and what I'm suggesting, and I have already taken it up at the Prime Minister's level too, is basically that the same way we measure now with technology, with GIS, with seismic, you map out the entire country, have the entire detail. It may take a few $1 billion, just the way Aadhaar did. And through that program, if you are able to map every inch of land in the country and be able to create a record of that, and then share it with the state government, share it with the corporations, imagine how much of, I firmly believe, entire tax structure will come down. You don't need those high rates of taxes. you will have much better compliance. You may need a very nominal tax to collect the kind of revenue we do, and it will only multiply. So therefore, I completely agree that is one of the core most activity which is required if we have to encash on the kind of the challenges we have on land, because we have limited land. Land is a scarce resource in the country. We have 1.2, 1.3 billion people. We have to take care of all of them. We have to have agriculture too. So therefore, we have had, as I said, in the last 10 years, many challenges. Land has become a major political issue. Today, to get a piece of land to do anything is a nightmare. And therefore, if we talk about Make in India or we talk about any privatized development, it just doesn't happen. It just gets stopped. So that's where my recommendation has been, and that is why I opened this thought in the forum, that if we can collectively take up this policy advocacy on getting the land data, create an institute for an organization similar to Aadhaar to record all the land resources in the country.
All right, so we're out of time, but we'll take your questions, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
My name is Ashish. I'm from the Mumbai Mega Project. I've got a suggestion. See, I've recently written to Niti Aayog on 2 large-scale ideas to get the project scene moving in India, and I want your view on it. The first is that the British government, under the Prime Minister's office, has something called the Large Projects Office, and it has got a bandwidth to handle $1 trillion worth of projects. We could have such a system here, a large projects office set up under the Prime Minister's office in India, directly under the PMO to execute large-scale projects. The second way of getting the project scene moving is something called urban equity withdrawal. And I've written a paper which I presented at Asian Development Bank to raise another $1.2 trillion over the next 15 years for raising large-scale finance. There are 3 parts of that thing. The first thing is to raise FSIs on PSU land and then share half with the PSU and let half go into the development of that project. This is around, in my estimation, around $40 to $50 billion can be raised by doing this. The second thing is to, when land around cities is transferred from agricultural to NA, you don't tax the first part of the transaction. You tax the second part of it, which will be the part after the NA conversion. Okay? So that will raise, in my view, around something like 300 billion over the next 10 years. And the third part is to convert, to do a 100-year perspective planning of all major cities in India and rezone certain areas. Now, if you do that, that will release around $900 billion. And I got some couple of tax experts to look at my plan before I presented at the ADB, and it will work. So we can have this huge amount of financing. What's your view on these 2 things?
I think it's very good, especially just to respond to that. On the first one, when this government came in, I know of in some of the sectors, the Prime Minister created a project office, say particularly for roads, because that was one sector which was under challenge. And let me tell you, it's taken 2 years, but I remember in 2014 when this government came in, there were 125 public-private toll roads in the country which were stuck. The projects were stuck after being awarded due to multiple reasons. Today, out of the 125, only 7 are still under challenge because that's got into litigation. But all the others have got resolved. One by one, some solution, some resolution has happened. So I think this government has worked on that. But many of the areas, you see, the challenges have been primarily at the state level because India is a federal structure. So the center has certain activity which can do, and a lot depends on the state level. And if that cooperation and working is not there, and many times we have seen because of political consideration that doesn't happen, that gets impacted. And therefore now this government is looking at, fine, if you don't get it, they will scrap the project, they will look at some alternates. Similarly, they have started to take up other sectors too, one by one, and creating that. But it's definitely a great idea to have a continuous process on a continuous basis whereby the PMO can have a project management cell which basically monitors. But I think that is happening in a different way. It can get strengthened further. The other area in terms of what you talked about, the NA conversion and the last point, which I think is an interesting thought process. What needs to be seen is that in that NA, who is the loser, or what is the compromise which a society is doing, because you have agriculture, which is also critical, and you have industrial or urbanization development, which is also critical. So that's a overall call which needs to be taken in a much more transparent manner, and all the stakeholders need to get involved, and through that journey see if there is a certain amount of compensation required, it needs to be seen from where it comes from. But hearing apparently from you, it looks like an interesting idea where it can generate resources, much better and larger resources, to be able to cater to the challenges which urbanization can bring in. Thank you.
All right then, so on that note, while we'd like to thank Mr. Kanoria, can we also invite on stage Mr. Girish Bhagat to please come forward to present a token of gratitude. Let's have a round of applause for our speaker, Mr. Sunil Kanoria. Thank you once again, sir.